Jeff and Nick, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Thank you,
Thanks
Laurie.
for having us today.
Excited.
Hey, usually I have one guest. Today I have two. So I know this is going to be a great show. And one of the things I love about having both of you here, and I let everyone know about your amazing backgrounds, is that Jeff, you came to wine through a focus in science, and Nick, you came to wine through more of a focus of service and the restaurant business. And so I love that you have these two amazing perspectives. So I wanted to start with your background and how you came to wine and maybe what that aha moment was for you that you said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so, Jeff, for you, what was it that really drew you to wine as a career?
Well, I have to say I was very, very lucky to stumble into it. I ended up enrolling at UC Davis after a chemistry teacher in high school sort of prompted me with the idea you could get a degree in making wine. I had no idea that was a thing. So stumbled into it, got enrolled in the program, started learning more about wine, started to get more exposed to wine in school, worked a bit at wineries while I was still in school, and just sort of jumped off the deep end into it. I had no idea what I was getting into. If you asked me back then where I would be today, there's no way I could imagine the things I've been able to do and see, many, many wines over those early years that prompted my continued interest. If there's one aha wine, I don't want to be, I don't know. A lot of people will look at this and say, yeah, right, whatever. But there was one red Burgundy that just changed my direction. I worked in Napa initially, so making a lot of Cabernet Merlot, a little bit of Chardonnay, but I drank a bottle of 1978 DRC Romani Conti Vineyard in 1988 that made me move to Sonoma County and definitely changed my career path. Now, those who know Great Burgundy know that's a pretty special wine, and I've never tasted it again. I'm hoping Nick will buy me a bottle someday for my birthday.
I know of that special wine, but I myself have not tasted it either. So give me an invite if you do get together for one. I will meet you out there. All right, Nick, you came at it from a different perspective. Tell me what was your experience?
Yeah. So, I was always going to be a banker and then started working in a restaurant in high school. Really good restaurant. Anyway, I was a dishwasher, just some punk kid. And one night, like somebody called in sick, like, hey, you're going to be a garde manger. And so I go back and we just got clobbered. We killed it. Bartender comes to the kitchen with a tray full of Irish cardamom or something like this. And I'm like, restaurant business is pretty cool. So I decided to pursue a career path down that road, more in the back of the house. Ended up at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I still reside. And there were a lot of cool opportunities there. And I sort of transitioned to the front of the house and then kind of fell in love with wine. I took a wine class in college taught by Stephen Geddes, Master Sommelier. He was really dynamic. And there was a lot going on that's in the city back in kind of the late 90s. And so there was a lot of cool wine opportunities. I got to taste a lot of great things. I think the first thing I ever tasted where I was like, oh, wow, that blew my mind was 1970 Dow Port, I want to say. Not quite as elite as 78 Romani Conti. Thankfully, over the years, as a sommelier working in Las Vegas and the Napa Valley, got to taste some things like that for sure. And now they're kind of untouchable. That was sort of my path in the short version.
Love that. And at Hartford Family Winery, you're known for your Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays and the whole idea of cool climate winemaking and the Russian River Valley being a place that's so special. I know you have many different origins, but specifically kind of focusing on that. If people don't understand why the Russian River Valley is so special, I'll start with you, Jeff. What is it that you think is so special about making wines in that area?
Well, it's a very unique place. Sonoma County is extremely diverse when it comes to topography, to climates. If you don't like the weather where you are, drive 10 minutes and you'll be in another kind of place. So we're very lucky in Sonoma to be able to grow almost every grape variety that we can get our hands on. It's just depending on where you are. So in the Russian River, we are very much influenced by the Pacific Ocean. So like where I'm sitting today at the winery here, we're about 14 miles from the ocean. So that's fairly close. But most importantly, we have some gaps in the coastal ridges, which those ridges go up to about 1,500, 2,000 feet. So they sort of block the fog in some sense that's coming off that ocean. And the ocean's cold out here, 55, 58 degrees. But there's some beautiful little gaps in that coastal range that allows cold air to come in. So the Russian River is one of the first places where that cold air rushes in. Every afternoon, evening, we see cooler air, fog, and it completely changes the growing condition. If you go 15 miles north of us, you're in an area where you grow Cabernet and really wouldn't think about Pinot Noir. You can grow Chardonnay in the higher elevations there and in the lower elevations. But really, when it comes to cool climate varieties, you really want to be here in the Russian River Valley because maritime influence. Very simple.
And Nick, what are your thoughts?
I mean, for me, it was one of my first places I ever fell in love with. Coincidentally, my first winery I ever went to was Hartford Court. I want to say it was like 2002. I was a young broke sommelier, and there was a woman that worked in like our restaurant catering sales department. Her husband was a fledgling professional golfer, like playing mini tours. So we got a job working for an airline to mitigate his flight costs. She's like, "Oh yeah, here, have a guest pass or whatever." So I flew to San Francisco. I was like 23-ish, rent a car somehow, and made it to up to Russian River Valley. It was pouring down rain. And somehow I found Hartford Court. It's not something you just like accidentally drive by. It's not like driving up Highway 29 in Napa and like, oh, there's that, there's that, there's that. It's like literally in a forest. But I found it when everybody was cool. And for me, it was, I think, where I really fell in love with the Russian River Valley, not just the wines, but couple of years later, I got invited to go to what's called the Russian River Valley Pinot Forum, which is like a 3-day immersion, which Hartford Court's involved with now, where it's like 60 different sommeliers and whatnot from around the country. And the thing I really fell in love with was the community. I lived in Napa for a couple of years, and that has its own community. I feel like with the Russian River Valley, it's very collegial. It's very chill. So again, like hippies in a forest, like it just felt my vibe. And yeah, the wines they're beautiful. They're nuanced, and it's cool working for Hartford and making 48 different wines or whatever Jeff makes. And like there is terroir. There is differences between place. And I think that's really interesting as well.
Well, you did send me the Fog Dance Vineyard Chardonnay that I have
Yes.
here, Green Valley, Russian River Valley. And we're going to taste that here in a second. But I have a question, Nick, just to follow up. For a while, Chardonnay was everything. And then it's anything but Chardonnay, ABC for a while. No, everyone's writing off Chardonnay. Now you see people coming back to Chardonnay. What do you think is causing that and why people are getting so excited about Chardonnay again?
That's the most amazing question. Thank you. So, I mean, this is, I host a lot of consumer facing events. And, my first question is always like, who hates Chardonnay? And you're always getting hands thrown up there. And then by the end of it, they're like, well, this is really good, and I think I have a kind of a global version of this. When I went to the Yarra Valley about 10 years ago and had my mind just blown, I'm like, wait a second, I was expecting golden, rich, flabby. No, everything's like drinking Rouleau all day. And so I think a lot of it is just like partially the consumer is pushed back. The consumer doesn't necessarily want that, what was fashionable in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s. They want a little bit more nuance and balance. And I think also on the flip side of that, what the winemakers really across the globe, not just the Russian River Valley, have done to kind of rein in the style a bit, but also be able to express place. I think that's helped drive it a bit, and, hopefully I'm not the only one screaming from the mountaintops that like, hey, that fog dance has a lot of nuance and a lot of balance. You can achieve that still through classic winemaking.
So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about the Fog Dance Vineyard Chardonnay and what you did here to give us this. I mean, it's wonderful. I took a little preview sip there, with lots of fruit, but also minerality there. And yes, it has a creaminess, but like Nick said, it's not that, your mother's Chardonnay, if you will. So tell us what you do and what is the style that you really go for on this wine?
So yeah, you have, number one, you have a name, Fog Dance. Why do we call it Fog Dance? Literally, back when we were naming this wine, there was an old satellite loop that was on the Green Valley Wine Growers website. Satellite view of the fog coming in and coming out, coming in, coming out every day. And it literally danced around the little ridges and mountain tops on the sides of the Green Valley proper. So that fog dance name describes the place in a way. But what this vineyard is all about, we planted this back in the late 90s, and it's right in the heart of Green Valley, which is, if there were a poster child for a Green Valley vineyard, I think fog dance would be exactly that. It's soil, which is called Gold Ridge soil. So it's old decomposed sandstone, which is old ocean bottom when we were all underwater here under the ocean millions of years ago. Volcanic ash that fell in. All this was uplifted, so we have very low water holding capacity in these soils, meaning the vines aren't big and vigorous. You don't want to grow tomatoes here. You can't grow corn, but they kind of mitigate the growth of the vine into a balanced situation. The cold that comes in just kind of sets everything down at night. We get warmth during the day that develops fruit. So in the end, you end up with this beautiful, I think of this wine as like exotic fruits. It's almost like green
Hmm.
mangoes, and it's not just, citrus and green apples and those things that we talk about with Chardonnay a lot. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance, and the longer you swirl the glass, the longer you sit with this wine, the more it changes, the more that comes out, the more layers that come out. So I think for fog dance, the Chardonnay for me is something that just develops. Very aromatic, very textural, but very racy. It has high acid. When I say racy, I don't mean lean and hard. It really just has this bracing acid that kind of washes your palate after you've experienced a little bit of richness, a little bit of sort of the textural piece that we get. And from a winemaking standpoint, honestly, our approach on everything is to get out of the way. We make 13 different Chardonnays. All these different vineyard sites have a different personality. And if I were to come in with a heavy hand, heavy thumb, and try and say, we're going to do this is our style as a winery, I could start hiding a lot of the nuance and a lot of the subtlety that comes out of all these vineyards. So our team here is very much focused on letting the vineyard show through. And I know everyone says that. We do it. I mean, it's a very hands-off style of winemaking here. I think of us more as babysitters. I mean, when I started in the business, it was more like, I'm a winemaker. I need to do things. Let me add some tannin. Let me find a better enzyme. Let me do this. Let me buy better barrels. Let me use more oak. Let me do this. I've got to put a fingerprint on, and I have to justify my existence to the owners that pay my salary. I'm doing something for you. And then you slowly realize, well, wait a minute. You don't need to do that. If you have a great vineyard, get out of the way. So we're babysitters. We're nurturing these
Gotcha.
wines along.
Given the style of this, Nick, because you spent so many years as a sommelier in restaurants, what do you think is the best way for somebody to make sure when they're ordering a Chardonnay at a restaurant that they end up with something that's this style? Because Chardonnay does have so many expressions. There's unoaked Chardonnay, there's super oaked Chardonnay, and then there's this style. So, what is the best way if somebody's at a restaurant with, one of these ridiculously long wine lists to have that sommelier really help them get to a style like this?
I think for me, I always appreciated people speaking in textures, right? Because I always had guests. I want dry. I want sweet. I don't want sweet. And it's just the like most confusing thing ever. Because the general consumer, in my opinion, I don't think really understands that, especially if they're in a certain age group. Because dry in the '80s meant high quality, right? With all the stuff that
Mm.
was being made from the Central Valley labeled Chablis, whatever. So for me, I love it when people describe things in textures. And to me, you mentioned it earlier, creaminess, right? I want creaminess, but I want brightness, right? Creaminess with balance. I think is a great way. When I do staff trainings, I'm like, okay, let's try to break this down table side into as few words as possible to paint a picture. We make a wine from a vineyard right by the coast that literally it's a margarita. It smells like margarita when it's fermenting, right? It's lemon, lime, sea salt. Okay, people can relate to that. Okay, cool. I kind of know what to expect versus like talking about specific fruits and all of this sort of thing. My comments on this wine is maybe my favorite wine we make. Uh, and I love Jeff said green mango. Like this wine smells like Thai food to me. It's like green papaya, kaffir, lime zest, all of these sorts of fun, high toned aromatic things, but then also creamy with lift. Yeah. or
Mhm.
brightness, however you want to say. Mhm.
I am super passionate about food and wine pairing because to me, wine is part of the recipe of my meal. And it's sort of that last ingredient that really makes it special. But we talk a lot about fancy pairings and things like that. But, Jeff, if it's just a random Wednesday night for you, what might I find you sipping this Chardonnay with? What's just a really fun, everyday kind of food that you think is great with this Chardonnay?
Well, I will drink this Chardonnay with just about anything, but I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of people really still stick by the, white with fish or maybe pork and, anything red, beef, lamb has to be, paired with a big Cabernet or a dark red wine. I'll go any direction with this. I mean, this honestly with like a really simple tuna melt or a grilled cheese sandwich is amazing. But you can
I
also,
love that.
I mean, I'll drink this with a fillet. I'll drink this with certainly with pork, any pork preparation. There's we have something in my household when my kids were young that was called special meat, and basically that was either chicken or veal piccata with way more lemon than most people would ever want because my whole family loves citrus. So literally, when my kids were tiny, it was my son was like special meat, special meat. So like that, a high acid, which with this wine, you'd think, okay, you don't want to there's the argument of pairing food and wine where you want like flavors, you want high acid with high acid, or you want richness with the richness. I like contrasting flavors as well. I think you can play both.
Mhm.
You know, you can do this like, just picture a simple little Tuesday dinner. Maybe you just get a little filet and, maybe you happen to have a little crab left over, a little Dungeness from that you picked the night before. You got a little left in a pile. So you do your little basic, filet, throw a crab meat on top, melt some
I'm
butter.
coming to
You don't
dinner,
need to,
Jeff. I'm coming to
you don't
dinner.
need to clarify. Just pour all the fat, everything on there and just eat it with this. I mean, and Chardonnay and red meat. What the hell? Why not?
Nick, what kind of just fun everyday food would I find you having with the fog dance?
Everyday food. I don't know. I'm kind of with Jeff, like simplicity is great. In preparation for this last evening, I had just seen this episode of Gordon Ramsay where he did his ricotta gnocchi recipe. I'd never made, handmade gnocchi and I made it last night with asparagus. And we drank this, not all of it.
Right.
I had to swat my wife away for the last couple sips. But anyway, yeah, that worked great. I mean, Jeff's on it, and I'll just reiterate him with the meat thing and Chardonnay. Especially textured Chardonnay. Like think of it like a condiment. What do you put on a steak? Often it's béarnaise.
Mm.
Your Chardonnay is your béarnaise. Think of that wine as your condiment, right? And you can do that with any type of cuisine as well. So yeah.
Well, we have another wine here, Jennifer's Pinot Noir. But tell me a little bit about Jeff. I know you've been making wine for, is it over 40 years now?
Yeah, rub it in. Thanks. 40
No,
40th
I find that
harvest last
impressive.
year.
We like
Look at the
experience. We
gray. Oh
like
my God.
experience. Is there anything what is the biggest thing you've seen change over that time in making wine, making Pinot Noir specifically, through that experience that's maybe different today than what you saw back in the beginning?
Well, I think probably more than winemaking, it's what we do in the vineyard. I think the vineyard side has opened up so many doors to make such better wines today than we did 40 years ago. To be really honest, back when I started, you had the vineyard manager and they did what they did in the vineyard. And in many cases, they decided when you'd pick and bring you the grapes, when you were ready or not. It's a bit of a stretch, but it was a very different world. We were farming in a very kind of classical, old school California way. We have evolved a lot, and today it's we don't talk about winemaking and vineyards. We talk about wine growing. The vineyard, the main purpose of the vineyard, other than to look beautiful and maybe create a fire break here and there in Sonoma County, but honestly, the vineyards are there to make wine. And if we're not trying to maximize quality by doing all the right things in the vineyard, we're going to miss out. And We know so much more today. When you look at the California industry, obviously we had an incredible number of acres planted, or maybe not obviously to a lot of people, but in the 1800s, we had almost as much acreage planted as we do today, which is just amazing to think about. Then we cycled through all these different crops, as Sonoma County and any agricultural area often does. So really it was the 60s, 70s when you saw the rebirth. And basically we're starting from scratch there in many ways. Burgundy's been making Pinot Noir a long time. We've been doing it. If you really look at it, you can say it's 60 years of real hard work. So the learning curve, you didn't have, none of these early growers, most of them at least, didn't have their grandfather's knowledge or their great grandfather's knowledge that was passed down. So we've gone from trying to figure it out to a very fast track, high speed evolution of getting better, planting the right plant material in the right places, even the right variety we were missing in the 60s and 70s in many cases. And then just how we approach farming. I mean, everybody talks about sustainability, organics, biodynamics, all these touchy-feely kind of farming techniques. And it's important. Whichever church you go to, if you're a biodynamics guy, great. If you're organic, great. If you're this, if you're that, as long as you're thinking. I think one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard is the best fertilizer is the farmer's footsteps in a vineyard. And it's being in touch with what you're doing and getting away from things like Roundup that 40, 60 years ago were just used rampantly, and other chemical things that just don't have a place in a vineyard, honestly. So it's really what we do in the vineyard today. Certainly, I can buy fancier tanks today. I think everything, there's so much more technology. We know so much more about, what's going on in the wine. Classic example of that, I was in Sancerre last summer on this wonderful trip through many wine regions, but we're out in a vineyard with a vigneron there who, farms about 8 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc on a 30-degree slope in Sancerre. And he doesn't really speak English. My French is really bad. Thankfully, my buddy is there who speaks fluently. So we're going back and forth. He doesn't own a tractor to farm that 8.5 hectare. We get back in the winery, we're tasting through all these wines. And, we the four winemakers there were like, so do you put these wines through malolactic? And he's like, I don't know. I don't do analysis. And these are wines that are just sublime. We had what was it? I think it was a 1992 Sauvignon Blanc that he had made a couple months ago. That was just insane. So technology isn't always the answer, but we have a lot of tools today.
We do. We do. Well, great. So I think, Nick, one of the frustrating parts for wine drinkers out there is that there's no easy way to look at a bottle and know, like Jeff said, that this is not using Roundup and this is using biodynamics and organic practices and cover crops and all these great things that the great wineries like yours are doing now. How can a wine drinker, if they're going into a restaurant or a wine shop, what's your advice to sort of weed your way through it? Because looking for USDA organic is not really the answer, because that doesn't really look at all the things that sustainability or organics really have to offer.
Another amazing question. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, even, 15 years ago, kind of as this started to become more evident, people were being more conscientious about what they're putting in their bodies. I just get those questions, and it's like, well, I don't really know. This is as a sommelier, I'm like, we only work with good producers, things of that nature. There's a lot more material and information out there. This is a recommendation I have for everyone is like, yes, it's very easy to go into these like big box stores and buy wine. Sure. Great. And you might get $3 off versus your neighborhood vendor. And especially, Laurie, where you live, there's a ton, and even Jeff, where he lives, a ton of great artisanal retailers and certainly amazing restaurants as well. Spend a little more and get to know the people there, right? Like, because they will have this information in their hands. And obviously there's an entire like thing of natural wine bars, wine shops that focus just on those wines. And sometimes, maybe our wines don't qualify, even though they kind of do. That's we could do a whole nother podcast on that, but we won't.
We could.
But just get to know the people, right? Again, big box stores are great. I go to them to buy tequila and 1.75s of Beefeater or whatever it may be. I don't necessarily go there to buy my wine per se. You know what I mean? Like it's just a
Yes.
more kind of artisanal product and getting to know people, great retailers. You worked at a great one in Manhattan, getting to know those people and asking the right questions. Hey, you know what? I don't love quote unquote natural wine, but I want something that's made naturally. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
Here's some things, and they'll get to know you. And I think that's as our world in this country becomes more just transactional and do everything online, which is great. I think this model still does exist for wine, which is cool. And it's a lot of passionate people out there that are, trying to have a business, and let them help you and you can help them
Yeah.
too. So that would be my
Yeah,
suggestion.
finding a good independent wine retailer that really is thoughtful about what they bring in, that knows every bottle that's on their shelf. One of my local retailers has a green tag with all the description of the wine, if it's organic or bio or any of those.
I was going to chime in really quickly on that, where when you look, it's a slippery slope. It's really hard for a for someone on the floor of a wine shop to know everything about every wine, even with all the knowledge that's available. If you look at our wines, there's never anywhere on there that says organically grown grapes or anything, other than there's a little sustainability stamp that's pretty innocuous on the back label, because there's so many differences. Organic grape growing has a totally different set of rules than organic winemaking. And we farm essentially everything organically, but we don't certify every vineyard, because a vineyard like Seascape out on the coast, we may in one vintage not be able to actually get a crop unless we use something that's not registered as organic, but it's a very soft, friendly material. So the label won't even always tell you this, and it's not that we're trying to hide anything or not tell the full story, but it's a really difficult line when people don't understand the differences, and it's so complicated. It's
It is.
really, really difficult. So you do have to trust in some cases, but do a little homework, go to some websites, read about the wineries. You'll find out some interesting things.
Perfect. And speaking of the wineries, and the vineyards, the Jennifer Vineyard, what would you say, Jeff, is the distinctive characteristics of this vineyard that make it so perfect? This Pinot is so delicious and bright and full of fruit, so balanced. What is it about Jennifer's Vineyard? A nod, of course, to one of your founders there, that makes this wine so special.
So earlier I described little gaps in the coastal ridges where cold air comes in. This vineyard sits directly in one of those gaps where the cold air rushes in every afternoon. So this is the coldest spot in my mind in the Russian River Valley. It's the most southern tip of the Russian River, south of a little town called Sebastopol. And because of that kind of extreme weather there, you end up making a wine that's, some would say, extreme. I love this wine. This was a vineyard we planted back in '02, began development down there. In most cases, vineyards 3 to 4 years into their life, we'll see a crop coming off that's producing grapes you can make wine from that's pretty good, and maybe not at the level of 20 years, but certainly, you have viable fruit. This vineyard, year 7, year 8, year 9, we were just starting to see that 3-year equivalent in this site, because it's just so cold, so windy, so stressed. This is a vineyard that kind of is a hallmark of one of our calling cards here is high risk, high reward. So we have vineyards where we literally take the risk of not being able to make a wine from that vineyard in a vintage because it's too cold, it's too windy, it's too this, it's too that. This fits a little bit into that. The extremes there create incredibly flavorful wines. You mentioned the fruit intensity. It's this beautiful, for me, beautiful bright red fruits.
Hmm.
There's no baked plums or any of that over the top fruit here, but it's savory as well. There's dried herbs and a savory, earthy kind of side to this wine that's super complex. Great acid in the mouth. I love this wine. It's one of my favorite Pinots we make. And again, we make 17 different Pinots, so there's a lot of options out there. But if you put this wine next to, say, the Fog Dance Pinot Noir, which we produce from the Fog Dance Vineyard, they're worlds apart, and they're only about 7.5 miles apart from each other. So that kind of shows what you can get in the Russian River Valley, depending on which ridge, which little pocket, which little neighborhood you're in. Incredibly balanced, complex wine.
Absolutely. Nick, what would be since you're such a chef over there and love to cook, I love that you could just whip up some homemade gnocchi on a Monday night, but what would you want to put with this wine ideally? Maybe it's a comfort food, maybe it's something that you love, your favorite dish. What would it be for you?
So, I mean, for the Chardonnay, we could have said roast chicken, but for me, I love Pinot with roast chicken. Literally just throw a chicken in the oven. It's kind of like gnocchi. It's 3 or 4 ingredients, I think we get scared by it, but we shouldn't be. Yeah, roast chicken, saute some mushrooms,
Yum.
in the pan drippings, call it a day. Yeah. That to me is, simplicity, I think goes a long way especially with wines like this, where you can really let the nuance come out. But you could do like whatever, St. Louis ribs, as long as you don't have like super sweet barbecue sauce. Totally great. Many, 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 many things. If you live by a coast, maybe some beautiful in season wild salmon would be great. Again, like Jeff noted with this wine, this shows the savory side of the Russian River Valley. There are more opulent sides of the Russian River Valley. This shows the savory, high tone version, which just opens up a world of possibilities. Duck, obviously, but who's cooking duck at home? Not many people. Yeah.
Right. I have a question for you. I'd love to ask this, and I'll start with you, Jeff. What is one wine myth that's out there that you would like to dispel? Because there's so much misinformation, I feel like, out there when I do wine classes or wine dinners, that people believe certain things that just really aren't true, maybe about California wine or just wine in general. Jeff, anything you want to set the record straight here?
Well, I touched on one. You can drink white wine with red meat. That's the most obvious one in the world to me. One of the greatest things in the world is champagne and a beautiful piece of marbled beef of some sort. But I think I don't know. I guess it's really price doesn't always drive quality. So I think there's a lot of very overpriced wines for what you get. And there are a lot of amazing bargains out there. And again, those are hard to find. I mean, we're very lucky living here in the middle of things. I have in my back pocket a number of friends that make great wines that are just stupidly affordable for what they are. And that's such a treat. That's hard for someone who lives in, Iowa or wherever and doesn't have that exposure. Yeah, you, Nick.
Yeah.
So I
Cycle
think
liquors,
it
baby.
comes back again to that idea of trusting your local wine guy to kind of maybe find some bargains for you. And I'm not saying expensive wines aren't worth it, because in many cases, I am the first guy to go spend money my wife probably didn't want me to spend on a bottle of wine when it's worth it. But think about finding cool new things, and don't be afraid of new varieties as well. I mean, we make Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Old Vine Sin as the core, but we also make a little bit of Chenin Blanc. We make a little bit of Grenache. We make Syrah. So things that people don't think about every day can often be really interesting. And don't be afraid of trying something new, I guess.
Great advice. I love that. What about you, Nick? Any myths that you saw at all the tables that you waited on that you want to dispel?
I'll dovetail a little bit into what Jeff said, but on the opposite side. So value doesn't equal price.
There you go.
So, for example, Jeff and I were in New Orleans about a year ago, and there's a very famous restaurant there that hadn't really marked up their prices like after the pandemic. And so something might be expensive, but it might also be like the greatest deal in the world. And don't be afraid, because you'll never get that opportunity again, especially if you love the great wines of the world. You know what I mean? Like the classics, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, absolutely, like unknown producers in other regions from Europe or even America, like or other places, you can find amazing things. But something can be of good value and still be really expensive, and that goes for everything in life, right? We could talk about not all California Chardonnay is butter, and I think that's very appropriate for this conversation as well. They aren't,
Right.
and actually most aren't. Yeah.
Perfect. Guys, Jeff and Nick, this has been so much fun. I thank you so much for coming on the show. Both of these wines are delicious. I'll post a link to your website so people can check out all the different single vineyard wines that you create. And I just appreciate your time today. And I just want to say thank you and cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you,
Cheers.
Jeff.
Thank you, Laurie. We'll